According to Feeding America, it's estimated that there were 55.8 million senior citizens in the US in 2024, which represents more than 16% of the total population. Of those, more than 8 million seniors were considered food insecure. Join us this week as we talk about hungry senior citizens through the documentary Leftovers. You're listening to Real Stories, Real Problems with Rachael and Roxanne.
Hi, Rachel. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you, Roxanne?
This was a tough one for me to watch. This was actually the only one that we've done of what are we? We almost must be up to about a dozen episodes almost now, I think. We're getting there.
Yeah, this is episode 18.
Okay. This is the only one that I had to watch in two sittings, because it hit a little too close to home. I'm only 57. I'm not an official or a legal senior citizen, but the hunger, the food insecurity, that's a door that I've been knocking on for a while. And I'm going to be knocking on it again. And it's absolutely terrifying. It was terrifying then, and the thought of having to do that again in 8 more years when I am an official senior citizen, it's sobering, Rachel. It really is, because I don't know if I'm going to have the psychological energy, the emotional energy, and or certainly the physical energy. Um, it's draining. It's draining. Fear is an exhausting emotion, and
Yeah, oh, for sure.
fear of the unknown is horrible, but fear of the known is pretty bad too. It's like, wow, not only do I get to look forward to being afraid again, but of this exact thing that I was afraid of before. Yeah.
Yeah, and this documentary was made in 2017. So God knows what they would say about the situation today.
I
Um,
know.
but in 2017, 2017
Yeah,
was a
take us
hard
there.
year.
Yeah.
That was the year that the Donald Trump's victory in the presidential election had been declared. That was the
Hmm.
year that a gunman opened fire at Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport in Broward County, Florida, and killed 5 people and injured 6 more. And then another 36 people got injured trying to escape. That was the year that Dylan Roof got convicted as a perpetrator of the 2015 Charleston church shooting and was sentenced to death. That was the year that Chelsea Manning got freed after serving 7 years of her 35-year sentence for leaking diplomatic cables and military files to WikiLeaks. And that was the year that the New England Patriots defeated the Atlanta Falcons in the Super Bowl, which was less upsetting than the rest of it.
No, no, that was and that was the first overtime Super Bowl, I
Yes.
believe. Was it not?
That
Yes,
was the
yes.
very
So
first overtime game in the history of the Super Bowl.
that's right. So yeah, we had a little more football and a lot more chaos and sadness.
Yeah. Um, 2017 was not an easy year, and I will grant you this was a hard watch, but the reason that I wanted to watch this one with you is because the interviews with some of these people were just so incredible. Like I fell in love with Carla Lamel.
Oh, I loved all of them. Yes.
Yeah, I mean the documentary opens and he's talking to people about their opinions on, senior citizens and being hungry and all of that. But then it kind of gets into interviews with some senior citizens, and the first person they talk to is actress and dancer Carla Lamel, who at this point was like 102, I think she was.
She was 102. I made a note of it. She was 102 and looks better than I do at half that age on my best day.
And she was in the original Phantom of the Opera and Dracula with Bela
Yes.
Lugosi. And she was a professional dancer. And it was so interesting to talk to her and find out, like, her whole story, I was fascinated by her. I could have watched 10 hours of talking to Carla Lamel.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
but I did think it was telling that Carla was, I mean, this is a woman who had a bit of fame to her name, and her uncle, Carl Lamel, founded Universal Studios.
Yeah.
So she had some money in her family. And she still was in this documentary because she was receiving Meals on Wheels,
Hmm.
like deliveries, because she needed
Right.
that. Um, at her age, despite the stunning career she had, despite her family money, she still needed the help.
Right. Right.
And this was a documentary that really touched on statistics. And that's, oh, I love that. When a documentary gives me statistics, that just makes my heart sing.
Oh, yes.
Um,
Yes, I know. Yes.
Yeah, and so like they talked about, the value of Meals on Wheels and how 1 in 4 Americans is over 60 and
Mhm.
29% of those people have a disability, and about the importance the important role that Meals on Wheels plays in these people's lives. And I just thought that
Yeah.
was so incredible to talk about this program and how much money we as a country save because of the small investment we make in things like Meals on Wheels.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and this is a woman who, like you said, her uncle, founded what still 100 years later is one of the major motion picture studios worth billions of dollars. She had her career at the beginning of the talkies. She remembered her line from Dracula, which was amazing. She still gets fan mail. It was wonderful. And then to find out that she's literally, living hand to mouth. That it doesn't matter how much money your family has. Anything can, and in her case, it was tuberculosis, I believe.
Yeah.
It was like I think I was more heartbroken for her than she was, because she was so positive and so happy and so inspiring. She was one of my favorite people
She
in the whole
was.
documentary.
And honestly, my big fear is that I am going to be one of those cantankerous old people who has nothing nice to say about anything. Like all my grandmother was the most kind, incredible woman, and I didn't see her for years and years. Because my grandfather died, and then she was my step grandmother. She had married him later in life. They both already had kids and families prior to that. And when my grandfather died, her kids whisked her away and put her in a nursing home in Kentucky where none of us ever saw her again. And so
Sure,
a few
sure.
years ago, my daughter, when she was little, I asked her what she wanted for Christmas, and she said more family. That's the only thing she wanted was more family. And so I said, you know what? I can give that to you. And we took a road trip to
Mhm.
Kentucky, and she got to meet her great grandmother. And
Oh,
she was in her late 90s at this point, and not like she wasn't moving great, and her memory and her hearing was not there. But she told me probably 150 times in the course of a 90-minute lunch that she was so proud of me and so happy with me and so thrilled to see my daughter, and like just nothing but positivity from my grandmother. And I
right.
so hope that I can have that, but I'm very afraid that I'm going to be one of those cantankerous old people that nobody wants to be around because I have such bad anxiety that everything feels very like upsetting to me. And
Well, and rightfully so. No, I mean this is not
granted,
an unreasonable fear right now, Rachel.
yeah, I mean right
You
now
know,
it feels a bit apropos. But just watching Carla and these people, like, they talked to a gentleman named Paul in the course of this
yes,
documentary who had von Recklinghausen's disease. He couldn't stand up. He couldn't even really sit up. He had to be held up by like contraptions and stuff. And he received Meals on Wheels deliveries. And he still donated very small amounts of money to feed the children because it was important to him to take
right.
care of other people. And the people that they talked to in this documentary were just the happiest, most positive people. And I really wonder if that maybe plays a big part in their, being as healthy and happy as they are and being like as functional as they are as people.
From my time on the streets, I found that to be true as well. I mean, yes, there is a high population of people on the streets who, are mentally ill, and or have a drug problem, but there's a large number of people that are just like me. uh Wrong place, wrong time, circumstances, somebody died, somebody ran out of money, you know and that community that we have, of when we find some resources, our first instinct was not to hoard it, but to find like our the other street people around us, that were like, wait a minute, did you know that this is over here? Oh wow, and we shared, and that's what made part of it survivable. Being able to help somebody else and somebody else, because we did see people that were less fortunate than we were, and it did our hearts good to help them. So I totally understand how Paul felt. I mean, when he was talking in the documentary about how he saved up for months at a time to donate $5, that's months worth of saving. I can just see this, like him putting a dime away here, a quarter away here, and being able to make up a donation to save the children. I totally get, how that would be rewarding for him, because he has a much less quality of life than I do. And that was one thing that made being on the street survivable, is seeing people with a lesser quality of life and being able to help them, because there is always someone worse off than you. There always is. Absolutely.
Yep.
And chances are they're going to have a better outlook than you do. Yeah.
Well, and one of the things that happened in the documentary was the director, Seth Hancock, talks about how he didn't do this because it was a passion project. He did this because he was asked to. And after talking to Paul, it became a passion project for him. And he sat with I think his name was Victor. Um,
Victor, the head banging food bank dude, as he
yep,
puts
the
it
headbanging
around.
food bank guy, who
Yeah,
was
the
like,
listeners don't know this, but Rachel sends me some notes before every podcast about things that she wants to highlight in the documentary. And under cast, she wrote Paul, and then banging food bank dude Victor Buick. Explain the head banging part.
so Victor Buick, the guy who was running the Meals on Wheels program in Marin County, California, was a he was either a guitarist or a drummer for a heavy metal band. And that's what he
Mhm.
did, like primarily. That was his goal, but to bring in, income and to help take care of his community, he ran the Meals on Wheels. And at one point after talking to Paul, Seth and Victor are sitting there and they're talking about the moments in this job that opened their eyes to see that this is a very serious problem and that made them kind of gave them that drive to want to take care of people in need. And Victor he was a fun dude. Like, he clearly had misgivings about the system and the way everything worked and about the, difficulty of his job because of how many, things he had to do to report to the government and to, track everything. And but he was clearly in this because it was important to him to take care of people. That was his goal. And Seth, you saw him, like, you went from seeing him making this documentary and you saw the moment he was in it, for real.
Yeah. The abrupt change, between Marin County, California, which I believe they said was the richest country, or I'm not country, county in the United States,
I think it was like the
to
fifth richest county in the United
it
States.
was,
It was
yeah,
right up
and
there,
then
yeah.
they went, yeah, and then they went to Tennessee, Owl County, I believe, Tennessee. I don't have the notes up in front of me. Owl County, Tennessee, which was the poorest county in the United States, to see how they handled, the food insecurity problem for senior citizens.
Yep. And in
Wow.
Owsley County, Tennessee, they said
Yes.
36% of citizens were below the poverty line in this county.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah,
talked to the woman who ran the food backpack program for children and senior citizens, because the kids come to school and they get free lunch through the school, but then they go home and they have nothing when they go home.
right.
And so they put together the backpack program to send them home with food. And for a lot of this, they were putting together backpack equivalent, like plastic grocery bags of things to bring to senior citizens in the community as well. And this was the area where they talked about how many senior citizens were the primary caregiver for their grandchildren.
Sure.
Um, and they said, like, in 2011, about 500,000 grandparents across the US had primary responsibility for their grandchildren. And even
Yeah,
within that, like,
that's
1 in 11 seniors were food insecure in 2022. And like they were going through these, but seeing how essentially the senior citizens were stepping in to help take care of the younger generations when they couldn't take care of themselves.
and that goes, I think, a lot. It's a cultural thing, I believe. I have friends in other countries, but if in my 30 years as a college professor, having students who come from other countries and other cultures who are appalled at the way Americans disregard the grandparents and the great grandparents in their countries and in their cultures, and in sometimes it's religious as well, in their religions the grandparents are revered. They are the matriarchs or patriarchs of the whole household, like, and they're the ones that are taken care of. They are appalled at the way that, oh, mom and dad have now retired, and well, now we have our lives, and oh well, we'll just let them do their thing, and oh, they can't take care of themselves anymore. Oh no, we're not going to take care of them because now we're off doing our thing. We're going to shut them away in assisted living or this, that, or another thing. And I think that's got a lot to do with the two. We just don't have that family cohesion the way that they do.
I think that's fair. And I also think right now, for like the last 15 or 20 years, I think part of it has been Gen X and millennial generations watching how bad the generations before us have fucked us all over. And that people who were able to work a single job and raise a family and buy a house and a car and take care of themselves have systemically voted away our ability to do any of those things, have pushed us as a
Right.
country into a giant, pile of poverty. And so
Right.
now we're fighting tooth and nail to be able to have a life that the people before us had. And it's really incredibly difficult and all saddled with student loan debt while we're doing it. And I think there is some, well, I can't afford to take care of you, and I'm kind of ticked off at you for it in the beginning anyway. So
Mm-hmm.
we're not like, I'm not dealing with it.
Well, the documentary opens with the documentarian. What I'm sorry, what was his name?
Seth
The
Hancock.
Seth, right? With him asking, random people when I say senior citizens, what do you think? And and most of them are saying, oh, grandparents, grandma, and then there was that one asshole that I swear to God, when he gets old, I'm gonna come back to life just to smack the bejesus out of him. You know, who said, well, bad driving. That's the first thing out of his mouth was bad driving. And then when Seth told him the statistics about how many, senior citizens going hungry, the everybody else he told the statistic to was rightfully horrified, but this self-entitled little shit says, oh well, that's by their choice, I think. And yeah, exactly, you look like
Yeah,
you're gonna have a stroke too. Yeah.
it was awful. But I think he probably is somebody who grew up in a house listening to his grandparents and his parents watch Fox News and parrot that same bullshit. And why would he care? He's been probably
Yeah,
surrounded by this stuff his whole life. Why would it occur to him to care?
exactly. And then when Seth relayed that to somebody later on in the documentary, another person it was at the senior center, I think in Texas, and he said, when he said, that this kid said this woman said, nobody is choosing to starve. Nobody is choosing to not eat. What they can have to choose between maybe eating and paying the rent, or eating and taking medication that keeps them alive. Yeah, that may be a choice where food is not going to win today. Food is not going to be the choice for today. It's shelter, it's my heart medication. Yeah, okay.
Yep.
And so that's I'm sitting there and I'm like, your time is coming, sonny boy. You know, oh.
Well, and even when they talked about, that I don't think we should spend money on, feeding senior citizens, they should do it themselves. But they talked about how every dollar spent in Meals on Wheels saves up to $50 in Medicaid spending.
Mm-hmm.
And more than that, it saves money because this means that the people who were going to have to go into a nursing home can maybe be in a senior center, and that the people who were going to maybe need to be in a senior center can stay in their own homes. Like it takes all of the cost that we spend on medicating and housing senior citizens and relieves some of that cost, which helps them and helps the country and helps the community. It's a no-brainer.
Mm-hmm.
And the cruelty seems to be the point in our society. Like we are doing this because we feel like we should hurt them. It's important to us to hurt them. That seems
Yeah.
to be the approach that we are taking to this for reasons that I don't understand.
It's exactly, it's like, well, how can we screw them over today? It's like, yeah, oh,
Yeah, it
it's
was
frustrating.
hard. And they talked about in Texas, when they went to the food bank in Texas, they talked to the guy who was running it, and he explained that in 2014, America threw away 96 billion pounds of food, of edible food, which was, and he did the math. He said even if he was assuming he was wrong, that the 96 billion was wrong, if we assumed 50 billion pounds of food, it would be 200 pounds of food for every man, woman, and child in the US. So, at what
Right.
appears to be correct numbers, 96 billion, that is 400 pounds of food for every man, woman, and child in the US that we grew, we harvested, we packaged, and then threw away, put it in
Exactly.
landfills.
Exactly, which is not only waste, of course, of the food, but also of the labor that it took to grow, to harvest, and package, and transport. And these are people that we had to pay. These are resources that we had to use, equipment that we had to use, power, electricity, that we had to use to get the machinery to do, and gas to transport that. And it just, I was overwhelmed by the different levels that this hit on, you know.
Yeah. And according to the National Resource Defense Council, I was doing some research. 40% of the food produced in the United States goes completely uneaten, and a third of the global greenhouse gas emissions stem from our food systems. And more than
Now
50% of
that I
those,
didn't know. That's interesting.
yeah, more than 50% of emissions from agriculture are a result of industrial practices that degrade soil health. So, in the process of destroying the soil, releasing gas emissions that are harming our health and the environment, we're throwing away almost half of what we're doing that for.
Right.
So we're causing harm and creating waste. It makes no sense, except for the concept that capitalism requires you to be in poverty. It is kind of forced poverty because if you're not poor, you're not, they don't control you and you're not spending your money in ways that they want you to spend it.
They want you to spend it. Exactly. It doesn't work unless you're spending money the way that they want you to spend it. That's simple, economics. And we need to create a need. We have to create a need in order for us to be hired, I guess, for lack of a better term, to fill the need.
Yeah, it was a hard watch, but also at the same time, like it was amazing to see that where we put in a little bit of investment, we saw incredible dividends. We saw the senior center in Florida where they had the
Yes.
Miss Senior USA pageant, and we got to
That was fun.
Miss Senior America. And they had
Yeah.
the like Tai Chi classes that they were doing and Zumba and bingo, and they were feeding all of the residents that were at the senior center. And these people had what looked like a pretty fantastic life. And they had socialization, and they were so happy to be there. They were taking care of each other and spending time together, moving their bodies and nourishing themselves in ways that are good for them and the community. And according
Hmm.
to the documentary, it is 10 times cheaper to put someone in a senior center this way than to put someone in a nursing home.
Course, a problem is easier to solve when it's still small, you know, absolutely. And sometimes people, and I mean, I'm like I said, I'm hardly a senior citizen yet, but as much as I love being around young people, I love being able to talk to people who remember the same presidents that I do. You know, so sometimes you just gotta like love to tell those war stories. And I remember back in 1985, I was, all that all that sort of stuff. It's the same way when my parents would get together with their brothers and sisters. Immediately, I saw years lift off of them as they were able to tell these, stories like, I remember it was a Tuesday, May 3rd, 1951, and and just, have them go over the same stories over and over again. That socialization is so wonderful. Well, if somebody's starving, they're not going to have the emotional, they're not going to want to get out of the house and go talk to other people. They're going to be ashamed, unfortunately,
Well, and they
and
did talk
stay
to
inside.
people in Tennessee, and they talked to some people in Mississippi, I believe, who, like, one woman who was blind. She was completely blind. She was raising
Right.
five grandchildren, and she had been volunteering up until, like, she lost her sight. She had been volunteering at her local food bank and the school and stuff. Like, she was really contributing to her community until she couldn't, and then she needed the
Right.
help.
Right.
And so clearly, like, people are out there putting themselves out there taking care of themselves in ways that they need to take care of themselves, but it's so hard. And if you can't afford groceries, if you can't afford to feed yourself or the grandchildren you're caring for, that's just a horrendous situation to be in. She can't do what she needs to do for herself because she's got to prioritize all the rest of it.
Sure.
And they
Sure.
talked
And
to,
that generation does prioritize, you know, in that way.
yep. And they talked to Frank Couch, and I thought it was so cute. He spelled his last name for us,
Yes.
Couch, um,
Right.
who lost both of his hands in 1985 working in a steel
Right.
plant. Um, and he needed Meals on Wheels, and they were bringing him like food packages, and they provided him food. They brought him a bag and they said there's pork chops and there's vegetables, and like they went through the list of everything in the bag, and he said, "Is it cooked?" And she said, "No, you have to cook it yourself." And he didn't even blink. He was like, "Yeah, that's fine. I can do that." And I was like, "So this man with no freaking hands
Hands, right?
has to
And
cook
no,
his own
no,
pork
no
chops."
prosthetics either. That was like it was just these little gnarled stumps, It was like, hey.
Yeah, it was a hard watch because he was getting the help, like they brought him food, but that was step one. Now he's going to need somebody to come in and help him cook the pork chops and prep the vegetables and do the things. Like it wasn't prepared for him in a way that he could eat it,
Right.
which was so hard. And then they talked to the people in Texas. We saw there was a moment where we saw Lomita, Texas. They had the food line outside the mobile food pantry, and they showed it next to the FDR Memorial, where they have
Mhm.
a bronze food line from the Depression as part
Mhm.
of the memorial of FDR.
Yeah,
It
that
was
was incredibly sobering. When they talked about the bread lines, and then they showed the footage from 1937, and I wish I had written it down, that quotation that FDR had said during one of his fireside chats in 1937. Um, you know, um, I was like, wow, everything old is new again, I guess. Yeah.
Well,
That
and I
it was
don't know if you've
incredibly
been,
powerful.
have you been to the FDR Memorial in Washington,
I have
D.C.?
no, I have not.
It is one of my favorite things in DC, and
Hmm.
I absolutely loved it. FDR said that for his memorial, he wanted something about the size of his desk. He didn't want this huge memorial like that, like the Washington Memorial or the Lincoln Memorial. He felt like that was wasteful. He didn't want it. So they made him
Hmm.
his desk size memorial. And then they built this huge walk-through memorial. Like it's a almost like a maze where you walk through and it's got huge quotes from FDR emblazoned into the walls and like statues like we saw from scenes from the Great Depression
Sure.
and the things that he did. There's an entire section that's devoted to his wife, where you get to go stand there and see the quotes from Eleanor Roosevelt and like
Hmm.
it was sobering and wonderful, and I really truly loved it. I thought it was a fantastic experience, and I loved that they brought that into this documentary.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'll have to, next time I'm in DC, I'll have to go. I've been to his library in New Hyde Park, New York, but I've never been to his memorial. But that sounds exactly like something that he would want, no big dog and pony show, show what I actually worked for and what my presidency was about, you know. That's extraordinary. Wonderful.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love the quotations on on the wall, that wall that they had. I didn't know that Eleanor also had a section as well in there.
Yep, she's included in there. And one of the things that I love about DC is that so much of this stuff there is free. All of the
Hmm.
Smithsonian museums and the zoo and all of it, it costs nothing.
Yes.
All of the memorials are free to go explore. And like they have cool stuff there that you pay for. Like if you want to go to the International Spy Museum, that costs money. But you can go explore. We went to the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial and the Albert
Hmm.
Einstein Memorial and the FDR
Yes.
Memorial. Like we did all of that the last time we were in DC, among other things. And then we went to the zoo and we watched the pandas be ridiculous for like 40 minutes. Yeah, pandas are like if bears forgot how to bear. Like they they roll around and they fall off of stuff and they just are.
They fall they forget that they weigh 800 pounds and can kill you. They just like, the last time I was in DC I was with Ed, and we met this British couple that they were just traveling companions. They weren't a couple. They were just a man and a woman who liked to go places together. And the man turns to me and in the wonderful British accent, he goes, I just found out that we burned down your White House in 1820, and we're so sorry about that.
That's
Like he
fantastic.
was waiting for the first American that he met to apologize to. It was great. I was like, we're over it.
Be like,
They
you
were wonderful.
preemptively were dealing with us now. Let's
Yeah,
just go.
right.
Yeah, it was so interesting to see and then to talk to the people in the mobile food bank line who were hitting multiple food pantry drop-offs because that was the only way they could feed themselves because they weren't
Yeah.
quite poverty level.
Yeah.
And they talked about how like for seniors who are between 125 and 200% of the poverty level,
Mm.
25% of their income goes to out-of-pocket healthcare costs. So fully a quarter of the money that they have coming in from Social Security and retirement and all of that, if they're within that band just above the poverty level, all of that money is going towards healthcare. Despite the fact that they have Medicare and other systems in place, they're still just hemorrhaging money into our healthcare system.
Yeah, of course.
And then, of course, they can't
And
afford to eat. So,
right, exactly. And of course the other thing about good old Texas,
yes.
the number of pages of the application to get a firearms permit is 1 page, and to get food assistance it's 18.
Yep.
18 pages, takes over an hour to fill out that form, but you can apply to get a gun in 1 page. Yeah,
And they said that the average senior
unbelievable.
in the state of Texas who
Well,
apply.
actually, no, it's not unbelievable.
Yeah, it's not. But they said that the average senior in Texas who applies for
Yeah.
food assistance gets between $16 and $70 per month. So for more than an hour, they sit down and fill out this paperwork, and if they get approved, they get less than $100 a month.
Right. That's ridiculous. Especially because, I mean, senior citizens obviously are going to need more nutritious food than, I mean, God, I remember when I was in college, my body would process plastic if I tried to put it through there. Not anymore. Of course, senior citizens they're gonna need more nutritious food because they're gonna be on more medications. They have more health problems. So yeah, they're going to be those out of pocket medical expenses. Those are always going to supersede food buying
Yep.
without a doubt. I mean, yeah, I may be literally hungry not that often, meaning I don't feel hunger pangs, but I can't well, yeah, I can because Ed made me dinner last night. The last time I had a meal that wasn't out of a vending machine. I mean, sure, I don't feel hunger pangs, but I am very unhealthy. Terribly unhealthy.
Yeah, as you get older, your need for proper macronutrients and micronutrients goes up. There's a reason we have these images of old people eating prunes and drinking coffee and stuff. Like your body doesn't respond the way it does when you're younger. And so elderly people can't
Right.
just be given like a couple cans of SpaghettiOs and be like, "You're good." They need grapefruit. They need prunes. They need they need like stuff that's going to meet their nutritional needs. And even, I
Right.
mean, I'm in my 40s and I take a handful of supplements. I've got omega-3 fatty acids because I don't eat any kind of seafood and because it's nasty and awful, but I can take a fish oil capsule and I take a multivitamin and my doctors recommend, trying to supplement things in ways because my body doesn't absorb vitamin D from the sun like everybody else's apparently. And that just the older you get, the more and more things like that you run into. And so these senior citizens, they
Right.
really can't just kind of wing it with ramen and chicken nuggets the way that college students do.
Yeah, exactly. Certainly. And it does affect your cognition, like they were talking about, your when you're not eating right, you're not thinking right. And boy, I can attest to that. Certainly, your brain needs a whole wide variety of nutrients and minerals and vitamins and things like that. Sure, junk food will get you through the next hour and make you feel really good and give you that dopamine high for the next hour, that sodium and and whatnot. But you can't do that for the long haul. I wish you could, but
Well, and I mean, we're kind of failing everybody at every level. Apparently, right now, the thing that's hitting people my age is there's been a dramatic increase in colon cancer deaths in people in their 30s and 40s and early 50s. A thing that
right.
never used to happen because they've sucked all the fiber out of all of the food. Everything that you buy at the store that's prepared or prepackaged or has been processed in any way, they've taken all of the fiber out of it.
Oh,
And
okay. That's weird. Didn't know that. Good to
yeah,
know. Something else
and
I can look forward to having go wrong with me. Yay. Okay.
yeah, it's surreal to me. And I remember being a little kid in the 80s, and the stuff that we were given was just absolute garbage by every measure, but it was just hitting the market. It was a new thing, and all the ads were, like Kool-Aid and Dunkaroos and all the Lunchables, and it was easy, and kids freaking
Well,
loved it.
sure, it was designed for the latchkey children in the 80s. That was my generation. It was designed for a 12-year-old to be able to walk home alone, from school. Mom and dad both had to work because yay, Reagan. And just make them be able to like just put it in the microwave without burning the house down. That was basically it. Feed your kid and make sure he doesn't burn the house down, and that's where you got the Lunchables bowls and all of these, whole meal and a little kid. I mean, it was like TV dinners from the 50s and 60s. It's like, yay, quick and easy. We can shove this in the oven for 20 minutes and give it to the hardworking, hungry man. He
Yeah.
comes home from work, and then we'll sit and watch Walter Cronkite together on Channel 2 in front of the big console set, you know, on the TV trays. That's the way that was, and the same in the 80s. That's why it started at that point. That was the latchkey kid generation.
Yep. I remember
Mhm.
being a kid and you'd pour in the little packet of color flavor and then literally a cup of sugar, a level cup of sugar into a pitcher of 2 liters of water, or, 4 liters of
Mhm.
water or whatever it was. And you drank that over the course of 3 or 4 days. Today, we understand that that is the worst thing you could possibly give a child. And yet, everybody my age drank probably 40 cups of sugar over the course of the year just because it was cheap.
I was thinking, wow, you made that pitcher last a couple of days? Good for you. Uh, you know, I'm stunned that I'm not diabetic. I really am stunned. But yeah, that's what that's what, and SpaghettiOs and oh, the mac and cheese
Oh,
in
yeah, the
that
Kraft mac and
weird
cheese.
neon colored, not natural at all color orange. I mean, sure, absolutely. Nothing but chemicals, nothing but sugar, nothing but preservatives. This stuff would last through a nuclear winter, and we put it in our bodies.
And to make it
You
last for
know,
a nuclear winter, they took out every nutrient, they took out every bit of fiber, they took out everything except for sugar, fat, and salt. And then
right.
eventually the government was like, you can't do that. You have to put some of the vitamins back. People are,
Right.
having babies that are all messed up because they don't have any vitamins. Put vitamins back. So,
Put some of the vitamins back. you
so
know.
yeah, like the idea of Wonder Bread today kind of makes me retch. And that was all we had when I was a kid. That's all kids wanted because it had that like very smooth texture that you could squish it into a ball with
Right.
your hands if you wanted. Like,
That entirely artificial, like, what it, yeah, exactly. That wasn't bread. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't bread.
yeah, if
Oh,
elderly people cannot live on those things. I mean, nobody
no.
should live on those things, but elderly people
Nobody's
can't.
right.
And
Hmm.
so when they were showing them in line at the food pantries, and it was the same mobile food pantry that I went to in January and February and stuff of this year, where you got in line and they gave you a lot of really great fresh food, but it was all right on that edge of going bad because otherwise they weren't giving it away. So every one of those people had to go to the food bank and get home and immediately wash and freeze or cook or whatever, everything that they got. They had to prepare it right away because otherwise it was going to go bad. But they at least had access. I was in fact a little bit like I felt my mouth start to water at one point because they were showing everything that was left over at the end, and it was like 4 bags of grapefruit, and grapefruit is my favorite thing in the whole world. So I was like, oh my God,
No,
so much
I
grapefruit.
love grapefruit.
Yeah, it.
Oh, yes. No, I love grapefruit. Unfortunately, with one of my antidepressants, I can't eat grapefruit.
Oh yeah, I
To
found
the
out.
and I was yeah, I was upset to the point where I wanted to change medications, and my doctor was like, "We're gonna like let no."
Yeah, I'm on thyroid meds, and apparently I was looking it up, and I was like, I'm not supposed to eat grapefruit on thyroid meds. Nobody told me that. I eat a grapefruit a day, and so I
Jeez.
talked to my doctor, and he was like, well, your numbers are normal, so if you want to keep eating grapefruit, that's not a problem. And I was
There
thinking
we
about
go.
it, and I was like, maybe this is part of why perimenopause is so hard for me because I am messing up my medications by eating grapefruit. Is
Eating
because
grapefruit.
so I haven't had grapefruit in like a month and things have been easier, so I'm going to continue, but
Okay.
like every so often I'm going to have grapefruit. It's just the best. So,
Yeah, it is. Of course. Oh God, I feel bad that your perimenopause is being messed up by grapefruit of all things. That's terrible.
yeah, well, it's the delicate balance of grapefruit and, hyperthyroid meds and perimenopause and, the but if it reduces the urge to murder, I will
Yeah, yeah,
I will
yeah.
I will
Well,
skip the
yeah.
grapefruit.
The urge to murder.
But yeah, they just were talking to these people, and we got to kind of know some of them in a very real way, and see. what was going on in their lives. And it was hard because you could tell if they did not have to deal with paying for food, if that could just be
Yeah.
taken off of their plate, so to speak, they could balance their lives in a real way. Or if they didn't have to pay for their medication, if just one of their major expenses were covered, they could have balanced everything
Yeah.
else.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the same situation that I'm in. It's like if I only had either a place to live or a car or, medication I could afford or therapy I could afford. If I had any one of these things, you know,
The rest of
and
it
I'm
would
a
be
completely
easier.
able-bodied human being. I'm a victim of circumstance. These people are victim of an elaborate long-term con.
Yeah.
I can't help but feel that. That's the only word I can use. It's a con game.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have to be afraid at that time of your life.
And they talked about how almost 75% of single Social Security recipients who are over the age of 65 depend on Social Security for basically all of their income, or the vast
Hmm.
majority of their income. So, people who are over 65 and not married, Social Security is basically all they've got.
Yeah.
And when they talk about, cutting Social Security or cutting Medicare and Medicaid and, reducing these benefits, I I don't think people remember why we put this stuff in place because elderly people were in poverty, starving, dying. And in the depression it was significantly worse. It ramped up, and watching elderly people die in the street was enough to encourage us to fix it. And I remember in
Right.
my history class, I have a history minor in college, and in one of my history classes, we were talking about the history of Latin America. And I remember in Argentina, they talked about the difficulties that elderly people were having because they did not have the money to cover their bills, catching and eating frogs and like
Oh my.
prostituting themselves to pay bills. I cannot imagine an 80-year-old woman out turning tricks and catching frogs in a bog to feed herself. But that's kind of
Yeah.
what we're looking at here. Not
Well, I mean, we have OnlyFans now for, there are people that do have that the geriatric fetish. There are those. I mean, and I have a very dear friend who's British who said, he said there is nothing in the world so bizarre that there's not somebody out there furiously masturbating to it.
That's true, but those people are,
I
are are not a huge audience, and I don't think every senior citizen in the US should be on OnlyFans to pay their bills.
No, certainly not. That's what I don't think survival sex is my like go-to here. Eventually, you know, it's just like no,
So,
it's
I've often thought, and there's been some evidence to show that people who create like a Pornhub channel or an OnlyFans channel and do non-sexual things with it can make a mint. Like
sure.
there's this woman who on YouTube, she does science videos, like detailed science and math, like astrophysics and stuff. And she teaches these like 1 hour videos. And on YouTube she makes a little bit of money. And she's wearing just like a tank top and a sports bra. She's not like sexy in it, but
Right?
showing a little bit of cleavage, and she makes bank on Pornhub for reasons that I don't quite.
Doing something wrong, obviously. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I know about that I could talk about in skimpy clothing. you
Yeah.
know,
And like I can just imagine a grandma Pornhub channel where she teaches you how to make pasta the old-fashioned way and whatnot. And like,
oh my God, that would be hysterical. But play your strengths for God's sake.
yeah,
You know?
but nobody should have to do that. You shouldn't have to figure out how to game the porn system to pay your bills when you're in your 70s and 80s.
I love that. That's going to be I think that should be the thumbnail for this episode. You shouldn't have to figure out how to game the port system in your 70s and 80s to pay the bills. That's beautiful. We can't go out on a higher note than that.
No, I think you're right. Here, let me find our outro.
All right.
Thanks for listening to Real Stories, Real Problems with your hosts, Rachel and Roxanne. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the documentary Leftovers. Join us again next week for a glimpse into another financial problem and a documentary all about it. If you enjoyed our show today, please remember to like, subscribe, and leave us a review on your podcast app. Thanks for listening. See you again next week.